Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. Thank you for joining me on this Sunday morning where it's been quite a momentous weekend for news. Of course, we're going to be keeping you up to date with all of the latest from Russia. We're also going to be discussing the economy, which has been a major theme this week, with Britain's debt now 100% of GDP, inflation rates the highest in the G7 in the UK. John Glenn, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, is going to be joining me. I'm also going to be speaking to Sir Jake Berry, former chairman of the Conservative Party, who I think is going to be quite critical of Andrew Bailey and the Bank of England, probably justifiably so. Jonathan Powell, former Downing Street Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Tony Blair, will join me. He was Chief of Staff when Vladimir Putin was elected in 1999, so I'll be very interested in his take on what's been going on with the Wagner Group. Kwasi Kwarteng, former Chancellor of the Exchequer under Liz Truss, is going to be joining me in the studio to discuss whether Trussonomics may be slowly being vindicated with the economic calamity that we've witnessed in recent days and weeks. Sir Malcolm Rifkind, again, another Tory heavyweight, former Foreign Secretary, former Defence Secretary, is going to be with me to discuss Russia, as is Tony Abbott, former Australian Prime Minister, the man who famously stopped the boats in Australia. You couldn't wish for a better lineup, folks. It's a very strong lineup. Do stay tuned because we're going to get through a hell of a lot. Now, let's go through the front pages. First of all, the Sunday Telegraph front page. Again, of course, it's the Russian situation. Wagner mutineers turn back after striking deal with Putin. We're going to try and delve into that story and find out exactly what has gone on, because it does seem interesting that yesterday they're obviously 200 miles out from Moscow and then today some deal has clearly been struck. Sunday Times, Putin clings on after mutiny. The Observer also going with that story, so papers from right to left quite understandably focusing on foreign policy. Rebel chief halts tank advance on Moscow to stop bloodshed. Mail on Sunday again, the question we'll be asking during the show of my various guests, can Putin hold on? Sunday Express sums it up nicely, doesn't it? Russia on the brink. And then the Sun on Sunday, Putin at the brink. Can I be a grammar pedant and say, shouldn't it be Putin on the brink? Anyway, leave that to the headline writers at The Sun. And then the Sunday Mirror, Putin pushed to brink. The word brink is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and I'm going to ask questions now of David Maddox, who is the political editor of The Express Online. Great to see you this morning, David.
Hi,
thank you for joining me. It's quite something, isn't it, to have had what has gone on in the last 24 to 48 hours. Wagner Group staging what we thought was a coup, and now, what do we think? He's been bought off by Putin. You've got Lukashenko, the Belarusian president, brokering some kind of peace deal. Your reactions, David, and how are the papers covering all this?
It was an incredible day yesterday. You know, we all thought that Moscow might fall to this as they were going up the M4. Literally, I think that's the name of the road.
The Russian motorway, the
M4. And then suddenly it stops. And I don't think we've really got to the bottom of what the deal was that stopped him. But clearly he's been
Prigozhin is
off.
a kind of homicidal maniac. He's somebody who punishes deserters with a sledgehammer.
Yes.
I think the big question yesterday, apart from the fear about civil war going on in a country with nuclear weapons, is, I mean, what would be better for the West? President Putin continuing or President Prigozhin and his murderous regime?
From the people I spoke to yesterday, President Prigozhin might have been the one thing that was worse than President Putin.
Quite.
So it was, it was interesting seeing how the papers covered. I mean, it's a kind of front page editor's dream, really.
Isn't it? The Sun on Sunday, Putin at the brink of revolution of the weekend. Lots and lots of analysis. What's interesting, I suppose, from the Western perspective is where it does live Putin.
Yes.
There's a lot of commentary. You've picked out a piece by Robert Toombs. What's he saying in the Sunday Telegraph?
Well, he's looking at it from a historical perspective. Is this 1917 again, which, of course, is when Tsar Nicholas famously was deposed, and it ended up with the October Revolution sometime after that, with the Bolsheviks coming in. But I think he's kind of leaning towards it being more like 1944, the failed coup against Hitler, which, of course, weakened Hitler, but he then stayed on and took revenge on the generals involved in that. And one could only imagine that Putin's got something similar in mind if he manages to hold power.
Do we think that Prigozhin's days are numbered? I mean, he's obviously been bought off for now. He's over in Belarus. I mean, I'd be watching my tea for Novichok, I've got to be honest.
I'd be making sure there's no ice picks lying around, which is, the famous thing that took out, Stalin had his assassins use. So it's... I can't believe he's feeling particularly safe at the moment.
And where does it leave the Wagner Group in relation to the Ukraine? Because on one hand, we didn't have much resistance from Russian troops yesterday as the Wagner Group continued to sort of march towards Moscow. Obviously, they look up to the Wagner Group. They captured Bakhmut. They're kind of like the extreme end of the military wedge in Russia. Is this something that benefits Ukraine overall, do we think, David?
Well, I think division inevitably benefits Ukraine, and the fact that Putin is now weakened, and clearly the Wagner Group are not happy. I mean, they've not marched on Moscow, but they're clearly not happy. So, yes, it will benefit Ukraine. And, of course, there's been discussion of Ukraine pushing forward anyway and recapturing land and pushing the Russians out. And they must spy an opportunity now.
Look, there's other things in the paper, not least our own economic situation domestically, which may or may not have been exacerbated by the Ukraine situation. No. Sunday Times, PM feels the squeeze and there's no rate escape. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place here. These deliverables aren't being delivered. Rishi Sunak, so-called man of economic stability, and it's all gone very, very pear-shaped. Yes,
and I'll be interested to hear what Kwasi has to say to you later, because I think Liz Truss and Kwasi are feeling more justified by the day. But I mean,
are there? You have people who criticise them heavily, saying, no, it was the mini-budget, what did it?
It's becoming, the guilt rates, the infamous guilt rates, which none of us quite understood, are now worse than during the mini-budget. And, this Sunday Times piece is fascinating, actually. It reflects a lot of what I was being told this week. But, Frank Luntz, the famous pollster, saying to Conservative MPs that anybody with a majority of less than 15,000 is likely gone. I mean, we're talking about...
could jeopardise our very own...
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Sir Jacob, yes. He might be doing more broadcasting on GB News.
And in fact, come
2024.
Certainly your guest, Sir Jake Berry, will also be...
he's on that. I'm going to ask him about his reaction to Luntz, because obviously he's the former party chairman. Let's also just get into what I've described as weekend woke idiocy. It's this astonishing story in the Mail on Sunday. St Paul's lambasts Churchill as white supremacist. Oh, my God, I'm so sick of these Churchill stories where idiots keep on calling the greatest Briton ever to have lived a white supremacist. He was a man of his time, but what the hell is this revisionist history going on?
It astonishes me. I mean, if it's not the National Trust, you can rely on the Church of England to outwoke anybody these days. But, literally attacking the man who defeated fascism in the 20th century seems to be a weird obsession.
This caption was written. We don't quite know how it was written, why it was written, but it's been pulled. So they've described Churchill as a controversial figure, but it initially said what, David?
So he is also a figure of controversy, as he was an unashamed imperialist and white supremacist. Well, he was a Victorian. He was born in the 1870s. Of course, he was in favour of a British Empire. He was a man of his day.
Yeah, nobody says he's perfect, but he was responsible for defeating Hitler and freeing the Western world from the tyranny of Nazi rule. But, let's overlook that.
And actually, if we go back to that first, the big story of the weekend, the defeat of fascism in Europe is a constant, thing of importance, huge importance, and we should be celebrating him.
Let's just lighten the mood a little, David, before you go. Kate is once again in sportswear on the front of the papers. Tell us about this. She's been having a knocking up in tennis with none other than Roger Federer.
Yeah, well, we know she loves her tennis.
I'm just looking on the front of the Sunday Express. She's looking very athletic.
So it's very good of the Sunday Express to put her on the front. Actually, a few papers did this week. It would have been a normal front page staple.
Does she sell papers if she's on the front, do you reckon?
Well, my old editor used to dispute that, but, she's immensely popular. It kind of reminds you that there are things to be cheerful about.
Yes.
And there are good things in this country. There's some sort of stability somewhere.
Also, it's a positive news story for Royals, rather than anything
Exactly.
David Maddocks, thank you for joining me this morning. Really lovely to speak to you.